Hi class, thanks for tuning in. My name's Jeffrey Wolf, and I will be reviewing my ethnography, which is Guests of the Sheik, an ethnography of an Iraqi village by Elizabeth Warnock Fernaya. This was a great book. I do highly recommend it, especially for those who enjoyed La Zandunga. There were a lot of parallels there, which I'll go into a little further. It was a really easy read, very light compared to some of the other works. I think this might be because the author actually is not a trained anthropologist. She comes right out and says that in the foreword. She's not an anthropologist. Her husband was the social anthropologist who was studying a remote Iraqi village, and she was kind of brought in as they were newlyweds, and he was also having some difficulty studying that culture because he really only had access to half the community. That's because of the gender segregation. That's a major part of that culture. He was not able to meet the women or really even see them. They stay indoors most of the time. They're always covered, and they don't commingle with the men socially. And what's more, the men don't even discuss the women in social settings with other men. It's just not done. So this author is brought in, and she is able to actually go into the harem of the sheik and meet the women, and she eventually befriends them. At first, she does run into a lot of the same problems that Beverly Chinas did in La Zandunga, in that she has trouble gaining acceptance. A lot of times she is mocked at first, or she's met with suspicion, similar to the way Chinas, was kind of viewed as askance. They ask why, who is this gringa, or why is she here? She kind of gets the Middle Eastern equivalent of that in Guests of the Sheik, but eventually she's able to kind of break those borders down. At first they mock her for even, she can't cook rice, for example, but eventually a group of women come and teach her how to make rice, because they feel that it's important that she know how to cook rice so that she can please her husband. This is important to them because they're worried that he might beat her or something like that. So obviously that wasn't a real worry, but eventually she does make friends, and she is able to kind of penetrate that society, and she really learns a lot and comes away with some really interesting observations. One thing that she does learn is the way that while there is obviously some sexism, the Iraqis really do honor age above gender. The old women, for example, at some of the feasts she gets invited to, the old women are served the same time as the men. So it's not universal. Another interesting point is she brings up the existence of nursing homes in the West, and the members of the Iraqi village are completely disgusted by this thought that women, grandmothers, or members of your family, any elderly, are taken away from their families and put in these special homes. They think that's just really cruel and just sick, and maybe it is. I don't know. So she learns these things because she does eventually get acceptance into some of the religious ceremonies and things like that, which again are very similar to kind of what we saw in La Zandunga with the fiestas. There's a lot of music, ritual, very religion heavy, and they're kind of these public gatherings that private members of the village put on in their own homes, and it's really interesting to read about. There were a lot of superstitions that she came across, which again, that was kind of similar to what we saw in Pritchard's book, where she's really observant in that she sees these superstitions, but she also learns the real mechanics of them, and why they can be beneficial, similar to the witchcraft in the way it kind of resolves family disputes. The superstitions that the Iraqi people and Guests of the Sheik have are also beneficial in some ways. For example, say a wife whose husband is beating her goes to purchase some expensive charms from the wise woman. Now, obviously that's superstition, but everybody in this small village knows that the woman has now gone to see the wise woman and purchased some expensive charms, and that shifts a lot of focus on these private communities to that one household, and lo and behold, with all that focus, the husband stops beating the wife. So again, these systems are in place for a reason, and they do work. Some other things that she sees during Ramadan, they have a religious parade that's very similar to the type Husam that we studied, in that you have these men who follow a vow, and they walk through the streets beating on themselves on their bare shoulders with chains, and in some cases even swords, cutting themselves to the point where there's actually a nurse that follows with them, binding their wounds. And so see a lot of parallels there. Also, a lot of the more modern members of that community feel embarrassed by this. They think that any Westerners or outsiders who will see these self-flagellation rituals will consider them to be primitive and backwards, and so they're embarrassed by that. And that's something that we saw earlier in the term. So that was interesting, I thought. And there were a lot of other practices that would seem very strange to us. The arranged marriages. There's slavery, real slavery there. One of the women in the sheik's harem has a servant who is essentially a slave, who was purchased from the girl's father for 20 pounds. I mean, that's just everyday life for them. And these women are definitely subordinated. They don't go out often. They're forced to cover themselves at all times, and they're taught that their idea of a good woman is to be a good cook, to stay home, to prepare the house for the husband. And for all that, you learn from the observations of the author that there's a little more to it than that they do have influence. What they do is they set an example by doing these things, doing them silently. They're always diligent. They do it with dignity. These women don't gossip. We learn they don't gossip because there's a possible result. You can't be flippant about a woman's reputation or talk about a woman going out with other unmarried men, because there can be very, very serious repercussions for that. And so we learn about that. We learn that these women also are very secure and content in their lives. So you just learn by the process of studying a culture for years and writing an ethnography. You learn a little more than what you see on the surface, and I think that's important, and that underscores the value of what these ethnographers do. All right, thanks for watching.